and some not.
Perfect. All right. Well, I think we're ready to get started. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. If you want to, please feel free to put your name and organization in the chat. As we move on. And I think we'll just move forward to introducing our two presenters. All right. Well, hello. My name is Kelly Boycourt, and I'm the Partner Services Manager here at the SLO Food Bank. I've been working with the SLO Food Bank for about a year and a half. Prior to that, I graduated UC Davis with a degree in animal science, and I worked locally in SLO County at a cheese production facility as well as within the wine industry, a natural combination, of course. And then I eventually migrated to the SLO Food Bank. I've really loved that transition to working here at the SLO Food Bank because that's combined my passion for the food industry, with a desire to serve the community. And then additionally, I get to work with all of our nonprofit agency partners throughout the county who are operating meal sites, pantries, residential facilities, and more. And so that has just been my absolute pleasure, and I find it really inspiring. And we've been putting together these quarterly learning webinars for our agency partners, community partners, and volunteers. Really, all are welcome. So thank you all for joining. And I will hand it over to Emily Hanson next.
Thank you, Kelly. Yeah, for those of you that I haven't met, my name is Emily. I graduated from Cal Poly with a degree in food science, and I've been with the SLO Food Bank for almost 5 years. I've worked in various roles throughout that time, and starting at the beginning of this year, I was able to start a role that's entirely new to our food bank as our procurement and food safety manager. I do want to highlight that the purpose of this webinar is not to act as a comprehensive training, but to cover some of the more specific scenarios and questions that have come up in our own operations and through our agency partners, through you all. We're hoping to cover some of the things not typically covered in your standard food safety training. We'll also be using this as a time to gather feedback about ways we can continue to improve our food safety resources. As my role is new, part of what I have been doing and will continue to do is identify resource gaps and then find ways to fill them.
Great. Thank you, Emily. And then we'll do a kind of a couple quick housekeeping items. There's our agenda. Perfect. So please utilize the chat function on Teams for any questions you have along the way. Emily and I, as we alternate presenting, will do our best to monitor those, and we'll have some time at the end to answer them, hopefully. And then if we aren't able to get to them, we can follow up with you via email. We also are going to be posting a couple polls questions in the chat, and you might have to close the dialog window after you submit your answer to the polls. It'll hang out in the middle of the screen. And please note that those are entirely anonymous. We can't see who what you're answering, so don't feel like we're recording it or anything. And then speaking of recording, the webinar will be recorded and it'll be emailed out to you all, and it's shareable if a volunteer or member of your organization could not attend, and we'll also be sending out a lot of accompanying materials and resources. So temperature logs, anything we mentioned will be included. And if we, for some reason, miss anything, please reach out to me and Emily if you're interested at all or with any follow-up questions. All right. And I think with that, we're ready to move on. Perfect. So here we're going to see an overview of the flow of food, and we're going to be using this graphic and flow chart to orient ourselves as we proceed through this webinar. So our goal is to touch on a really wide variety of food safety topics. I mean, you can take an entire master's class on food safety, so we're not going to get to everything, but we're really trying to focus on areas of food safety that are most applicable to our charitable food operations, such as pantries, meal sites, the SLO Food Bank itself, and really hone in on topics that we've either seen agency partners confused about, things that have confused us or that have challenged the SLO Food Bank, and just keeping in mind throughout the way that this is all existing within a much larger frame of the flow of food, all the way from sourcing it, transporting it, which can happen multiple transportation trips, sorting food, storing it, and ultimately distributing it to our neighbors in need. So we'll keep referring back to this to kind of guide us through some of the food safety topics. But ahead of that, we're going to touch on kind of some background as to where do our food safety rules and regulations come from. So while it might seem like sometimes it's coming from me via email, that's not always the case. And so Emily and I are going to provide some background and history on that. Oop, you muted, Emily.
How about now?
You're good. Although
Perfect.
the slides disappeared for me.
Let's try this again. How does that look?
Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. It's not a webinar if there isn't one tech problem.
And I will
Okay.
talk on mute later, rest assured.
So, why is food safety for pantries and meal sites important? And I want to start this with a couple informal questions to the group. This will just kind of like frame why we're talking about it. It's also going to get us comfortable with polls. So, those questions will pop up in just a little bit. Like Kelly said, this is anonymous, this is supposed to be fun. So, just remember that. My first question is, how many of you have ever eaten a piece of food that is dropped on the floor? And we'll wait for those answers to trickle in. All right. So we've all done it. And now, as a follow-up question, would any of you serve that same piece of food if you're planning to bring it to a potluck? Okay. So it looks like our answers are changing, right? Yeah. So the reason I like to start with these questions is because we may provide advice later on in this webinar that may be different from how you personally approach food safety. We're not here to say any of someone's personal choices are wrong, but to provide guidance on how to best serve our guests, the neighbors and clients that use our services. So when I think about food safety in terms of what we all do, these are some other main points I think about. The CDC estimates that 48 million people get sick each year from foodborne illness. Food banks, pantries, and meal sites often work with food handled by many parties and then serve that food to higher risk populations. So practicing food safety is really a way of showing care and dignity to those that we serve. Now, we also can't talk about food safety in regards to food banking without first talking about the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Food Donation Act. Try saying that 5 times fast. So, this was signed into existence in 1996, and it protects donors from liability when they donate food in good faith. This also protects nonprofit organizations in the distribution of this food. It states that a nonprofit organization shall not be subject to civil or criminal liability arising from the nature, age, packaging, or condition of apparently wholesome food or an apparently fit grocery product that the nonprofit organization received as a donation in good faith from a person or gleaner for ultimate distribution to needy individuals. So, what this all means is that we have a lot of protection in the work that we're all doing of sourcing and then redistributing food to those in need.
All right. And so, where does this food safety guidance come from? So, I mentioned it's not just the SLO Food Bank, and this is also playing into how the entire flow of food, in our state and in our economy and in our communities is really existing on a much larger scale. And so, local, state, and federal public health agencies provide guidance to anyone: grocery stores, farmers markets, major restaurants, retailers, things like that, so anyone who stores, prepares, or distributes food. At the federal level, we have the Food and Drug Administration Food Code, more commonly known as the FDA. And on the state level, we have the California Retail Food Code. And then locally in our county, we have the County of San Luis Obispo, and more specifically, the Department of Public Health. And I want to highlight that these agencies informing our food safety practices really have an information flow and procedure implementation. They try to align their food policies, and we kind of see a trickle down from the federal to the state to the local level. And sometimes it goes back up with feedback that is then either changed or implemented or what have you. Most of the time, they do align. Another really important entity I want to mention is Feeding America. And Feeding America is a nationwide network of more than 200 food banks, of which the SLO Food Bank is in part such as us, Santa Barbara Food Bank. There are food banks in almost every county of California. And so our goal at the SLO Food Bank for our community partners in the Hunger Relief Network, our agency partners, community organizations who host our neighborhood distributions and everyone else are often being informed by other entities and agencies. So it can sometimes lead to a delay in information, even if we try our best, or sometimes we all have to work together to figure out how to implement new policies. And so with that, how might that affect our specific site types? We'll wait for the slide.
Yeah, I'll move the
Oh
slide,
no, I think,
Kelly. Can you hear me?
yeah, I think you're a little frozen is all.
Okay, I think we might want to turn off our cameras. It seems like it's freezing just a little bit.
Okay. There we go. Okay, I'm still here, even though you might just see my cat there now. All right, so at the SLO Food Bank, we have 5 different types of agency partner sites. And these nonprofits receive food from the SLO Food Bank to then distribute in a variety of manners, which often lines up with these site types. We have over 80 agency partners right now, and you can see the percentages by site type. We have agencies that are operating a basic food pantry, meaning they do not have refrigerators nor freezers. So they're distributing shelf stable and whole produce only. There's a small typo there. Whole produce, meaning that it doesn't have to be refrigerated. So that's things like onions or potatoes. They are safe to store without refrigeration. And then we have an expanded food pantry, which has shelf stable food as well as refrigerators and freezers and can distribute TCS food. And TCS food stands for time and temperature controlled food, meaning that they do need refrigeration or freezer temperatures to stay safe. And so our expanded food pantries have the storage and equipment to do that. Next, we have a limited meal site, which is distribution of ready to eat meals that only requires simple assembly or reheating. An example of that would be making a chili that does not require raw meat being cooked, and you're just dumping beans and canned corn and heating it up, or microwaving a pre-prepared meal from the frozen food section. Um, a full meal site is on-site preparation of ready-to-eat meals in a commercial kitchen. So this is kind of the standard phrase of a soup kitchen. They're making food from scratch. So cooking raw meat into a ground beef skillet dinner for people, or cooking, eggs into an omelet, things like that. So that would be a full meal site. And last, we have a residential meal site where all food is stored, distributed, and prepared by residents or program members. An example of this would be a homeless shelter, a sober living facility, or a safe shelter home. All right. So one of the updates I mentioned, or one of the agencies I mentioned, Feeding America, has released a recent update that's going to affect our meal sites. And this is really just an FYI. I want to kind of get it on everyone's radar who's here. And if your agency is specifically affected, don't panic, don't worry. I will be reaching out to your agency directly. We have quite a bit of time to get this all settled. But a limited meal site and a full meal site are essentially going to combine into just a meal site. The reason being the limited meal site with the minimal preparation, beyond cutting whole produce, almost every other activity in meal preparation does fall under a full meal site. And it is easier to just combine them and hold them to the same higher standards of food safety to be on the side of caution and make sure everybody is being safe. And in addition, allowing all the agencies to have the ability to prepare full meals from scratch if they need to, which more often than not, limited meal sites do graduate to full meal sites. And so we will be reaching out to agencies about that change, but just a heads up that we'll have 4. So currently, our agency partners with the SLO Food Bank do have some food safety training certification requirements. And you can see them listed here by site type. The main one right now currently is that only the ServSafe manager is required for a full meal site. The ServSafe manager course is a longer course, about 6 hours, and covers a lot more about hot holding temperatures of prepared foods, reheating and reserving prepared foods, and things like that. It would be really standard for an industrial restaurant or kitchen, like anywhere you would go to dine in slow, most likely or should have somebody serve safe manager certified on site. I have this certification. Emily has this certification. It's doable. And then more commonly is the serve safe handler. So if you've ever worked at a coffee shop or a cafe, you probably had to get a California serve safe handler food license. And that's a shorter course, about 2 hours, and it goes over general food safety basics. So right now, all of our sites have to have at least a handler and then the full meal site a manager. Going forward, the new requirements will be all meal sites will need a serve safe manager. And then additionally, Feeding America has provided guidance that volunteers picking up rescued food will have to have food safety training. So we'll be working with all our valuable partners doing this work to make sure that they're supported and know where to access those kinds of trainings. And then I think Emily has another poll question about that, if ready.
I do. So, as we look to the future and we know that more of your volunteers or staff members may need training, we'd love to get information about what type of training would be easiest for you. So, we have a question on the screen there. It's asking if we were to offer food safety training to help your agency meet these new requirements, what type of training would you be most interested in? Would it be an in person training or an online self paced course? And that feedback will be really valuable as we make decisions moving forward. Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate that.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so not that that was not the most thrilling thing we've all heard, but let's get into some more fun stuff that's not policies and regulations. So we're going to start with the flow of food. And right now you'll see that sourcing and procuring food is kind of grayed out because we're focusing on things that our agency partners are actively doing. And more commonly, your food is sourced from the grocery store or SLO Food Bank, and then it moves into transportation of some kind, sorting, storing, and distributing. So Emily is going to touch on some topics that are applicable at all stages in this flow of food that we want to ensure our partners and ourselves here at the SLO Food Bank are being really mindful of.
All right, so we're going to kick it off with the most exciting topic. So we know that good personal hygiene is second nature to most, but what we wanted to highlight here are some of the most common mistakes we see and some of the issues we see are getting more attention in our post COVID world. So, two of the most common hand washing mistakes we see, even at our own facility, are one, people not washing their hands for long enough. So, we know that we want to scrub our hands with soap and clean running water for at least 20 seconds. And then two, not turning off the faucet in a way to avoid recontamination. And this is really easy. You can simply use a paper towel or your elbow to turn off that faucet. And then we move on to hand antiseptics, which are most commonly referred to as sanitizers. And we all know these are not a replacement for hand washing. And another mistake we often see is after using sanitizer, people not waiting for their hands to be fully dry before touching food or equipment or putting on gloves. So that's something you really want to keep in mind. And then a more interesting situation that has come up since the pandemic is that during the height of the pandemic, we know many organizations and businesses started making their own hand sanitizer to try and meet the need. And many organizations, including us, have now ended up with an excess, and we have to check for best by dates on the product. And when I say that, the first question I always get is, can hand sanitizer really go bad? And the answer is no, it doesn't go bad, it doesn't spoil, but it does definitely lose its effectiveness over time. And then another important thing that came up is that some brands were actually released without FDA approval. And in some very extreme cases, they actually used a type of alcohol that's very dangerous for application to the skin. So whenever we receive a donation of hand sanitizer, we one, check to see if it was on any sort of recall list, and then two, check for best by dates to ensure it's truly effective. All right, another very common question we get is, do I really need to wear gloves? And the general policy is that single use gloves should be used when handling ready to eat foods that are not in packaging. So think deli sandwiches or salads or things like that, or just any foods without protective packaging. So for most of our agency partners, this generally translates to whole produce. And this is especially important for unpackaged whole produce since you often don't know if it's going to be consumed raw or cooked when the client takes it home. That's why it's always important to practice safe hand washing and wear gloves when handling it. Another thing to note is that you want to look for gloves or just equipment in general that is approved for use with food. So I have a screenshot here of some gloves you can pick up from Target. And you'll note that food safe materials will usually say they're FDA compliant. So you can see on the back of this box it says that, or they may have a seal from NSF, which stands for the National Sanitation Foundation. And then we have another question for the group. We're curious how many of you find you have a difficult time sourcing supplies like gloves? And there may be a few reasons for this, so feel free to include that there. Just gonna wait for some of those answers to trickle in. This is really helpful as we prioritize where we can help you out the most with making sure we're providing safe food to our neighbors. Great, thank you. And feel free to keep answering that. We are going to move on to the next slide. So, again, this may seem obvious, but we work with so many hardworking individuals. I find myself having to say this more than I ever thought I would. If you are sick, stay home. Symptoms to pay particular attention to in handling food are vomiting, diarrhea, jaundice, which is yellowing of the skin and eyes, and sore throat with a fever. In many cases, when someone experiences one of the above symptoms, they should be excluded from the operation until they have been symptomless for 24 hours. So it's something I really want to highlight. Just because you are feeling better does not mean you are no longer contagious. And some cases require even longer exclusion. And of course, as always, please refer to your medical provider if you have any specific questions about anything related to this.
All right. So those were some topics that we all should be mindful of during this entire flow of food, and hopefully they were pretty familiar to us all. But let's talk a bit about transportation. So generally, after procuring food, either pick up at the SLO Food Bank or from a grocery store or purchasing it from a retailer, the next step is getting it into your site, the pantry or residential facility, etc., that might be there. And so we have a couple points that we really want to highlight here that are kind of, again, more geared towards nonprofit charitable operations.
Yeah, so just like Kelly said, now we want to move on to transportation, and we're going to have particular focus on some higher risk transportation activities, including food rescue and home deliveries. And when we first started talking about this, Kelly recommended some sort of chart to show kind of the flow of food and temperature changes. And I thought that was a great idea. It's a great visual, especially because so many of our agency partners are working with vehicles that don't have refrigeration. And so keeping these things in mind is really important. So I have a little example diagram here of what it might look like. So the first one is a gallon of milk just purchased from a grocery store. So it's at the cooler at the grocery store. It's nice and cold. Then it goes through checkout, goes to someone's car. So maybe it's hitting the top of that safe temperature zone, but we're okay. And then it goes direct into someone's fridge and then it cools down quickly. When we're working with food rescue, that food typically goes through that transportation process at least twice. And at each of these phases, we have the possibility for the milk to go out of its safe temperature zones and not come back down in the safe amount of time. And just in general, anytime your food is going in and out of temperature zones like that, you're increasing the risk for pathogen growth. So the example below is milk rescued from a grocery store. It's nice and cold. Maybe it's transported in an agency van that doesn't have refrigeration. So it's going up to that top to the top of the temperature zone. It's going back to the pantry where it then needs to be sorted and then put into the cooler. Then it goes to the client and eventually makes its way home. So we can see there's a lot of potential risk in this process. So, how do we limit risk with transporting TCS or perishable foods? The first thing you can do is make sure you're using a calibrated, accurate thermometer. This is really important, and this is something we have to do here at the food bank on a regular basis. We have to make sure our thermometers are accurate. And a really quick way to check if your thermometer is reading correctly is to simply take the temperature of a glass of ice water. This is a little, middle school science lesson here. We know that water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So you want it to be reading within 2 degrees of that. And if it's not, you should be able to contact the manufacturer for information on how to calibrate that thermometer. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to follow up with us after. And then the second thing you can do is use temperature control equipment. So that things like thermal blankets, coolers, and refrigerated vehicles, if you have access to them. Third, you can take temperature checks at key points in the food pickup or drop off process and then document them. That's a really big part of this is making sure you're documenting those things. So, some key points during grocery rescue are at the point of pickup from the store and then post sorting to make sure your food hasn't gone out of safe temperature during that time it took you to sort it. Um, and then the last thing you can do is actually consider changing routes or schedules to shorten the amount of time that food is out of temperature control. The general rule is that deliveries made out of non refrigerated vehicles should be completed in an hour or less. And a great example of this is the SLO Food Bank's own home delivery program. So, for those of you that don't know, we partner with Wilshire Community Services and Right On Transportation to facilitate a home delivery program throughout the county. And Right On Transportation is the one who schedules the routes and actually delivers all the food. And as the program has expanded, they've continued to add routes, which ensures that the amount of time that food is out of temp control is shortened. So each route takes only about an hour to complete. It's also very important that TCS or perishable food should never be left at the door if a client is not home to immediately receive it. So, some other transportation and home delivery best practices include some of these tips here. So, a delivery vehicle should be clean and free from odors, pests, animals, and any other materials that could adversely impact food safety. This is a huge thing to keep in mind since so many of us rely on volunteers and volunteer vehicles to transport food. So, this is a really important thing. I have a cat that I absolutely love, but if I've taken her to the vet, I will make sure that I clean and sanitize my vehicle before I think about delivering food. Um, and so food deliverers should inspect their vehicles frequently to ensure that vehicle interiors are clean and free from debris. You also want your free food deliverers to have a knowledge of basic food safety principles. And then another big one that gets overlooked is you want to have some sort of identification of where the deliveries are coming from. So this could be logos on shirts or delivery vehicles, maybe flyers with the food, or even labels on delivery boxes. I've included a photo here of a really inexpensive magnet we actually got at the SLO Food Bank for one of our pickup trucks. And the reason for this is because we have a lot of incredible organizations in the county who deliver food, and we actually very often receive calls from clients requesting changes to home deliveries that are being done by an entirely different organization, but they're not sure who's dropping off the food. This is a safety measure for the client to be able to know where their food is coming from in case they have any questions about it, and to be able to let the organization know if they're going to be out of the house at the time of delivery. So this is a really important thing that does often get overlooked.
Thank you, Emily. I know the identification on home deliveries always makes me laugh because I'll get a call from a client or a partner and they're like, somebody, delivered food and we don't know where it's coming from and I don't really need it delivered anymore. And I'll ask what kind of food is in the bag they received. And I'm like, that all sounds so familiar because quite a few of our partners are getting it. So that identification would be really helpful. Otherwise, I just kind of start cold calling everyone to be like, all right, who's going here? So moving on, after you've transported your food to your location, the next step is sorting and organizing that food before moving it into either shelf-stable storage, a fridge, or a refrigerator.
Yeah, so when we talk about sorting, there are some really important questions we want to ask. First, do we know where or who the food came from? This is a really important question for all of us considering the type of work we do. And this is why things like food drives and little free pantries inherently come with more risk because we don't always know where or who that food is coming from. Then we want to ask, was the product stored and transported correctly? So, just like we talked about, was it held at safe temperatures? Was it transported in a clean vehicle? Then we want to look at it and see, are there any physical signs like looks, smells, or tastes? Just kidding. I would do that at your own risk. That something may be off with the food. Then we ask that $1 million question, is it okay to distribute food past its best by date? And this is where food banks and pantries often face well meaning clients, volunteers, donors, and staff. I know that I've been guilty of this, who really want a black and white answer to that question. Is this food safe to eat? It's blank days past its best by date. But that answer isn't always black and white. You should always ask the questions regarding source, storage, transportation, and physical signs, all before starting to talk about the best by date, as those will all be better indicators of the product safety. So now we will dive a little bit more into best by dates and product storage. So best by dates are typically provided by manufacturers to indicate when a product will be at its highest quality. Best by dates aren't actually required for most food items. The only item that is required to have a best by date listed is actually infant formula. Manufacturers do like to include best by dates because they want their food consumed when they know it's going to taste the best, which is great. I want to eat my food when I know it's going to taste the best. And the USDA does provide a really useful tool called the Food Keeper app, which we often refer to get guidance on a product's general shelf life. So I want to highlight that this app does not show best by date extensions, just general shelf life info. Um, but food banks do often refer to this to develop their own policies about how long after a best by date they will still distribute a product. And so I have a little screenshot of the app here, and then we'll include a link to this in the post presentation information. But you can see this is a screenshot for product storage recommendations for fresh milk. You'll see that it recommends that fresh milk be consumed by its use by date, but if you choose to freeze it, you can extend that date quite a bit. Another question we often come across is, what do I do if I can't find the best by date? We see this a lot with canned food items that maybe just have a product or a lot code listed and they don't have a really clear best by date listed. So the first thing you can do, if it's from the SLO Food Bank, call us. Our inventory team has done a fantastic job of logging almost all the best by dates for all the products in our inventory system, so we can pull that info up really quickly. And if it's from another source, you can call the manufacturer, and that contact information should be listed directly on the food product. That is a requirement. And they should have a customer service or quality assurance team available to answer that question. And if you have any further questions about that, please feel free to reach out. I've gotten pretty good at reaching out and asking for that info. Something else that I want to highlight is that some food banks and pantries will develop their donation acceptance and sorting policies, keeping other things in mind too. So we know some of our very small pantries will actually not accept any food past its best by date, not because it's not safe, but simply because they can't have it tying up valuable storage space and they have to prioritize the space for the freshest product available. Here at the food bank, we're working with such large quantities of food, and we're the intermediary between all of you and clients. We have to factor in the time it takes to sort, package, get the food to you, and then ultimately for you to get the food to clients. That's the reason why so much of our grocery rescue is done direct through agencies. It's so we can get the most out of those shorter shelf life products. Now, we do know that many of you are looking for more specific guidance about this, and something I'm very excited to share is that I've been working with our food rescue team to develop some posters and other resources to help our network better navigate Best By dates, and those should be available in the next few weeks. So then we move on to some other kind of common sorting and donation questions. I would say these are the top four questions that come through our front desk line. The first question is, can we accept backyard raised eggs? And the answer is, unfortunately, we cannot accept those for redistribution. So eggs can only be distributed from registered food handlers, and your donor should know whether or not they're a registered food handler. And then we have home canned and preserved foods. And again, this is something that we cannot accept. There are some exceptions for those with cottage food licenses. These are often people that sell at farmers markets. But again, your donor should know whether or not they have that permitting. And then we have backyard grown produce. And the wonderful answer is yes, we can accept. This is what our Glean Slow program is built around. The only important thing to note is that produce must be in its whole form, so not cut or peeled, and you still do want to inspect it for product integrity. And then we have meat raised through 4-H programs. You've probably heard somebody at the food bank talk about fair meat before, and this is what we're talking about. And the great answer is that can be accepted. You just want to make sure that it's processed by a USDA certified processor or butcher. And the great news is that almost everybody who processes meat in our county is USDA certified. All right, so now we're on to the other side of sorting. And it's time for you to possibly dispose of some product that you weren't able to redistribute. So the question is there a proper way to throw away food? And it actually depends. So oftentimes you can just throw spoiled food into green waste or standard trash without issue. But believe it or not, there are also sometimes some rules about how we dispose of high risk foods. So foods that are part of a recall may have specific disposal instructions. Occasionally, producers may even request for product to be sent back to them for safety or reimbursement purposes. So, we're actually going through this exact process with our chicken soup recall. Some of you may have received an email notifying you of this. And any product that we have on hand, we're actually going to turn back into the vendor and we'll get a reimbursement for that product. Some of you may have seen something similar with the Jif peanut butter recall that happened a few months ago. They actually issued a statement that said that if you have any of that product on hand, you can submit and get a reimbursement for it. Um, and then in more extreme cases, some food items will actually require a proof of destruction. So this could literally be product taken to a landfill, covered with dirt, and then you have to take pictures of it and send it to the local health authority. This typically only happens with large food producers, so this will rarely happen with you guys, but it is just something to keep in mind. So then as a pantry or meal site, some of the things that you really want to keep in mind is to just be aware of your surroundings. So you want to keep in mind, are you in an area where your trash may be compromised by people? This is an unfortunate reality in some cases, or compromised by pests. Um, if you are in an area where you're at risk of people going through your trash, we encourage you to adopt procedures to make sure they aren't accidentally taking product that could make them sick. And if you are in an area that could be compromised by pests, you want to be mindful that you're not attracting them as they could contaminate other things in your facility. And if the answer to either of these questions is yes, consider ways you may be able to better secure your waste bins. Here at the SLO Food Bank, our trash is kept covered, and then during off hours, it's actually kept behind a locked gate. And if you'd like any advice on how you could improve this at your own facility, please feel free to reach out to me or Kelly.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you everyone for your patience. I hope the audio is coming through and the slides are coming through, but the recording does look good on my end. And if you see me muting, or not muting, but turning off the cameras for some of you, it's just to try and make sure our presentation is going smoothly. It's not that I didn't enjoy seeing everyone. All right. Let's move on to storing food after it's been sorted. And I'm going to focus mainly on refrigerator and freezer storage. And so on the next slide, we're going to see two photos of a fridge, two photos of fridges, fridge A and fridge B. And looking at these two fridges, just kind of think to yourself, is anything jumping out, any major differences? Any great things happening in the fridge storage you're seeing, or anything not great? Something I see in fridge A is that we have some uncovered food. Additionally, we have some unlabeled items. And I will say I got both these photos from Google, so don't worry, these are not, I'm not going around taking photos of fridges. But yeah, so fridge A, yeah, exactly, Matt. Organization, fridge A is kind of messy, and I have to admit sometimes my fridge at home definitely looks a little bit more like fridge A, even if I really want it to look like fridge B. And it's important to keep in mind too that a lot of our partner sites are indeed using residential refrigerators and freezers. So this is kind of this might be the storage at a pantry you see, because oftentimes residential fridges and freezers are much easier and more cost effective to obtain than an industrial one. So back to fridge A, I mentioned we see some uncovered food. It's kind of cluttered. It's hard to see what all is in there. And a lot of things are kind of unlabeled because they're left over. Whereas fridge B is very organized. You can clearly see everything that's in there. It seems to be organized by food type, and it's really easy to see all the products. And so I just want to highlight that fridge B is definitely what we want to strive towards. And the other note about fridge A is it is really overcrowded and can actually affect the effectiveness of the refrigerator. Fridges rely on airflow, and an overfull fridge might not be performing as well in keeping your food as safe as a well-organized fridge. And then additionally, you want to make sure you can see all the products in there so that none of it is going to waste in the back or perishing in the back of the fridge and you don't see it. I think we've all been there where something is funky in the fridge and you finally dig in there and find that, it's the spinach from 3 weeks ago. All right. And a couple other tips for proper fridge safety on the next slide. The other thing we want to be mindful of is not only, the horizontal storage on each shelf, but the vertical storage of a fridge or a freezer. And there is a proper food storage that should be present in your fridges or freezers. And the main reason being, if any of the food on the top shelf accidentally, the packaging becomes compromised and it starts leaking or falling down, or anything like that, that it doesn't contaminate all the food that you have stored below, especially since refrigerated and frozen product tends to be more expensive product that your pantry possibly spent a lot of money on. So we want to ensure that it's safe for our clients and that it's also helping us make sure that we're providing, the most cost-effective food. So the proper order of storage, you always want to think, how is this going to ultimately be consumed by the client? So on the top shelf, you should have your fruits and vegetables because those are most likely ready to eat. Think about an apple. You just pull it straight out of the fridge. Maybe you wash it, maybe you don't, and you consume that. So you want to make sure that it's stored above all the other types of food. Next would be prepared foods. Again, these are foods that you're likely to eat right away, such as a deli sandwich that you got from Trader Joe's or a pre-made salad, or additionally, food that you prepared already, in a residential facility, maybe that you would either just eat cold out of the fridge, leftover pizza, or that you would reheat. Next, you would want to store your raw meats beneath those two top layers. And you want to store your raw meats in order of the temperatures they need to be cooked to for food safety. So each different type of meat has a different safe minimum food temperature that it should be cooked from if it's raw. And you want to store them in that order. So first, we have fish and whole cuts of beef or pork. Those have to be cooked to 145 degrees, so they should go above ground meat, which needs to be cooked to 155 degrees, which is above poultry, which needs to be cooked to 165. And if you're confused about the specifics, we'll provide this chart, but a great rule of thumb is to remember the three general categories of fruits and veggies, prepared foods, and then your raw meats below. And then on the next slide, perfect. Another thing I mentioned kind of with that cluttered fridge, it would be hard to practice FIFO. So what is FIFO? That is first expired, first out. You might also hear this referred to as first in, first out, but we do want to keep an eye on expiration dates in the fridge, so kind of balance both those ideas. And the idea is that the food that will be first to expire, the first to become perishable, the first to go bad, should be in the front of the fridge so that you grab it and distribute first while it's still safe and hopefully yummy to consume. And those should be the first products out. And then additionally, you want to make sure that you have temperature logs, although not a requirement, they're strongly, strongly recommended to help track the temperatures of your fridge or freezer. Even a simple temp check once a day can be really valuable to make sure that your food is staying safe. We would like refrigerators to be less than 40 degrees Fahrenheit and freezers to be less than 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And I try to let all our partners know that this is also really valuable to make sure that your fridge or freezer is still performing right. It can really help an agency or organization catch if a fridge or freezer is having a mechanical issue going on before it becomes an irreparable issue. And so that's something if the temperature is slowly drifting up, but the same amount of food has been in the fridge or freezer, it's still in the same, air conditioned facility. It might be worth calling a maintenance person to have them see what's going on. Additionally, the SLO Food Bank actually experienced this 2 years ago. Our cooler was increasing in temperature very slowly, and we have a very big cooler, so we knew it was an issue. And our neighbors had been grading, and the construction and dust had got into the fan system of our walk-in cooler, which is actually exterior, and it needed to be cleaned. But that temperature had drifted high enough that we were hours away from potentially losing all of the food in our walk-in cooler, which for the SLO Food Bank could have been potentially, thousands and thousands of dollars of product that we wouldn't be able to distribute to our partners and clients. And so something to keep in mind too in our area is that we are subject to more and more inclement weather. In addition, heat waves. We were talking about that while some of us were waiting for this to start. And so it can just really save you from expensive repairs if you can respond, sooner rather than later by keeping an eye on it. In the worst case scenario, if your fridge or freezer does go out of temperature and isn't safe, and if you're following the safe storage practices listed here, your top shelf foods, those whole produce, would most likely be safe as long as you can get them re-refrigerated. Right. Perfect. Lastly, we have distributing food, which is the reason, we are all here, and probably the most important reason is getting this food to our neighbors in need. And I'll hand it back to Emily.
Thank you, Kelly. And I do want to say we're in the home stretch. So thank you for staying around so far. So our last topic is going to be repacking. And repacking is packaging items into manageable sizes for agencies and recipients that may not have the capacity to receive larger quantities of product. This is something we at the food bank know very well, as this is most of what we do. And the reason we wanted to highlight this is because this topic has come up quite a bit recently. And something we want to highlight is that bulk repacking of exposed, ready to eat food. So, this is perishable and shelf stable items other than whole, uncut produce, must be done in a clean room. And as you'll see, that note to myself there, this quote is actually direct from Feeding America. Um, and the Slow Food Bank does a lot of repacking, but only with whole uncut produce. Because a clean room, I mean, I have a clean bedroom at home, so I would consider that to be a clean room. But a clean room, in the way that they're describing it, is actually a commercial space that is free of allergens. It can be sanitized, and it has a lot of really important equipment to help you do it safely. So, proper repacking of foods that are not whole, uncut produce comes with many strict requirements, including but not limited to enclosed commercial food service clean rooms, trained supervisory personnel, new packaging materials, and labeling meeting the requirements of the Fair Packaging and Labeling Act. So, it's no small feat to try and do this. And I'm actually going to ask that Kelly talk about her experience with cheese processing.
Ooh, yeah. So I used to be a cheesemaker for about 3 years in SLO County at Central Coast Creamery. Highly, highly recommend their cheese. I could testify it's an incredibly clean facility. Um, and before everybody gets a really romantic vision of cheese making, I just want to say it really was like an industrial processing plant. And something about the clean room I want to note is it's actually a requirement for a processing plant to have, for repackaging, have a HACCP plan, which is a hazard analysis plan. And you have to have certain control points along the way as you handle the food to ensure it's safe, which could include taking the pH. A lot temperature checks are required and monitored. Additionally, we were inspected by not only the local county, public department of health, but additionally a state dairy agency came in to inspect us and things like that. We also repacked whole wheels of cheese into the very standard cheese wedges that you see at the cheese counter in the grocery store. And part of that was ensuring that the cheese wedges we sold had nutrition labels. So we actually had to send all of our cheese produced to be tested so we could have the calorie information, we could have potential allergens listed, the date of processing. And all of that was to ensure if there was a recall on our cheese product, we would actually be able to provide where essentially every wedge of cheese went. So it really is a lot, and beyond whole uncut produce, there's a lot more requirements. So something for agencies to be mindful of. And I know sometimes the SLO Food Bank has some products that might come in larger packaging that might be a lot for one household or client. And if you're running into that a lot and it's not working with your program, please reach out to me and Emily. We would love to hear that feedback because we want to ensure that we're providing useful as well as, tasty and valuable food to your organization because everybody's time is valuable and we want our clients to ultimately get food that they're able to use and are going to enjoy cooking with their families.
Yeah, that's a really note. Thank you, Kelly. And it's also something to keep in mind. We do pretty frequently get offers for donations of like restaurant size products. We literally were offered a barrel of olive oil one year. And it's so tempting to say yes to that and say, oh, well, if I can just put it in smaller packaging, then we can distribute it. But we just want to encourage you to be really careful when thinking about accepting donations like that. All right. So now we're going to wrap it up and we're going to bring it back to what's important. It's the people that we're serving. And so people like you have really worked to change the narrative of what food assistance is. We all know it's not just canned food, it's also fresh fruits and veggies, it's fresh milk, eggs, and meat, it's meals made with love, and so much more. We know it's for anyone who needs it. It's families, children's, older adults. And also think about your favorite holiday or the last time you had a nice hangout with family or friends. Food played a part in it in some way, right? And the reason I say that is because our work can be so serious that we don't often think about this, but food is truly meant to be enjoyed. And so, what we're trying to get at here is that people deserve to eat without fear of getting sick or harmed.
Yes, thank you, Emily. And then additionally, for the SLO Food Bank and for our agency partners, we do want to make sure that you feel like you can easily access all the information you need for a successful program because we truly could not do it without our agency partners and Hunger Relief Network and community organizations. It's actually in the SLO Food Bank mission statement to work with this network. And so we want to make sure that we're providing everything that we can to you and ultimately our clients and neighbors. And so we're always open to feedback. We're here to be a source of help. If I do a site visit and see something, I just want to make sure that your agency is able to correct it before, say, the county of public health ends up there. And so, really want to work together and just know that we're all doing our best and really valuable work. So, thank you, everyone. Here's our contact info, and it'll also be included in the post presentation. I do see one question from Terry that maybe Emily could speak to. And then if anybody else has a question, feel free to use the raise hand function or put it in the chat. Hopefully we can maybe turn our cameras back on if it's working. But again, thank you all who were able to attend.
Yeah,
It looks like, oh, sorry, Emily.
Thank you, everyone. I can just quickly address Terry's question. So, Terry asked, is there a definition of a clean room? And there is. And what we can include in the follow up documents is actually Feeding America's definition of a clean room and then what they outline as requirements for repackaging.
Are there any other questions, burning food safety questions? Well, if not, or if you think of something later, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you, everyone, so much again for attending. Even if you have feedback in general about the webinars or an issue with the SLO Food Bank or a question you have or a challenge that's unrelated to food safety, we are also completely available for that. Other than that, oh, wait, I see a question about repackaging pet food.
Yeah, that's a great question, Sheila. So, actually, the same requirements apply to pet food. And there actually is some guidance that we can send out about that. That's a really great question.
Thank you, Emily. All right. Thank you, everyone. I hope everyone stays cool and comfortable and safe in this heat wave. And hopefully, we'll see you all at the next learning webinar. We'll send out details on that in our Hunger Relief Network newsletter and email it out to our agency partners.
Great session. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Terry.
guys.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. You guys were awesome.
Thank you. All right. Bye, everyone.